This is Dava Lee with your MOEP Legislative Snapshot for Week 4. This week made up for lost time due to snow. Debate on bills started in both chambers, but we're going to look at committee work first. The Emerging Issues Committee voted out House Committee Substitute for House Bills 2404 Haruza and 2172 Terry. Representative Haruza will handle the bill, which lifts deed restrictions, allowing charter schools to purchase more buildings. We opposed this bill. The Elementary and Secondary Education Committee heard House Bills 2120 by Black and House Bill 1698 Christensen. They are two anti bullying bills that we were just watching for specifics. But after we heard the presentation, I considered moving it from the watch list altogether or moving it to support. The bills require reporting to parents of both bullies and the bullied students. They require notification of board members and classify certain but unspecified bullying acts under criminal harassment. However, the final supporting witness suggested a carve out for students who have, quote, sincerely held beliefs, unquote, so they would not fall under these provisions if they, for instance, quote, don't use someone's chosen pronouns, end quote. After hearing that, we submitted informational testimony suggesting guardrails with details regarding criminality, adding SEL education, and making sure all students are safe regardless of anyone else's sincerely held beliefs. We will monitor it very closely and speak to members when we are in the Capitol next week. The committee also heard House Bills 2230 by Burns and 2298 Terry, which will limit technology use in grades K through 5 to 45 minutes a day. And they will return to physical textbooks with paper, pencil writing, and cursive required. We submitted opposition testimony for these bills as currently written because while we understand that technology use has exploded and does impact students' ability to process information, critical thinking, and executive functioning, physical textbooks are hugely expensive, especially when it comes to replacing them every 3 years. And the state is underfunding education as it is. And once again, in the carve outs for kids who could use technology, they omitted ELL students who often rely on digital tools. Could move this to support if some changes are made. Floor debate started, and good news, yay, House Bill 1757, the Gifted Ed bill, was taken up and perfected. It will come up for a third read vote soon and likely cross over to the Senate. Bad news is that House Committee substitute for House Bill 2033, the sunset removal for transgender health care, has been placed on the informal calendar, which signals it could be taken up very soon, likely next week. The Senate, we traveled to Jefferson City on Tuesday for the Senate education hearing on Tuesday. We testified in opposition to SBs 906 and 971 by David Gregory and Curtis Trent, the open enrollment bills. These bills would create an equity gap between rural education and suburban and urban schools, lead to involuntary consolidation of rural schools, which could harm economies of rural communities, moving funding from districts would put the sending districts at a disadvantage. Opposition was broad among education advocates. We also testified in opposition to 1002 Schnelting's bill, which moves Board of Elections to November because it will politicize the elections. Fun fact, the chairman of the committee thinks that these elections should have a D or R by candidates so we, quote, know their values. We disagree with that very strongly. It also takes local control from districts regarding term length, and it makes the terms 4 years, which means finding volunteers to run, especially in small communities, would become even harder. The Senate debated a couple of bills that we're monitoring. Bratton's Senate Bill 948, the Parents' Bill of Rights, came up and debated. It was amended, but it was ultimately laid over on the formal calendar. This means that the sponsor wants to either change it, negotiate something, or realized it was just going to get filibustered. So the amendments that were added came from Democrats. They brought in the definition of parent, which is good. And this is kind of interesting. They require any educational entity, private, parochial, homeschool, FPE, that receives voucher ESA funds from the state to abide by all provisions applying to public schools, which is what we advocated for in our testimony. And there's that amendment was added and it got adopted, which kind of surprised me. Um, And then there's a third amendment that's about more financial transparency, but it was pending when the bill was laid over. Senator Reen's HB 663, which put Misha under gubernatorial appointment, was debated, and there's an amendment to try to change the member appointment to different things that Senator Beck put out there, but it's pending, and that bill was laid over also because it was filibustered. Usually we don't talk about Senate rules, but the Senate changed a rule last week that will make it harder to end debate on bills and slow down the final votes on bills. It was hotly debated, but ultimately it passed, and most of the no votes came from the current or past members of the Freedom Caucus. That was quite the week. Next week's even better. Looking ahead to week 5, the House shows nothing new scheduled as of this update, just executing out some things that were heard this last week. The Senate has lofty goals for next week. The Education Committee convenes on Tuesday, the 10th, at 8 a.m., and will attempt to hear 6 bills in 2 hours. 3 we oppose, and 2 we need to hear for clarification, and 1 wasn't on our list. We are opposing Senate Bill 1085, NICOLA, which prohibits public school staff from encouraging social transitioning. Senate Bill 1238 by Schroer, which would require instruction on the positive impacts of religion on American history. Senate Bill 1300, Bratton, addresses school safety, aka hardening schools and bringing in more guns. The bills we need more information about are 1404, Bratton's addressing foreign ownership of education services, and Tenet 29, which requires accessibility of school district spending. The committee will also exec out 4 bills heard this week, which were controversial, the open enrollment and Board of Education. They want to try to do all that in 2 hours. This week, they didn't get to all the bills they had last week, so I'm not sure what's going to be heard, but we're going to be there to find out. The Select Committee on Property Taxes and Tax Commission meets next Wednesday morning to hear 4 property tax bills. I promise I will listen to that, but we will read updates from other education organizations for guidance because David Lee doesn't speak tax. The Joint Education Committee will meet Wednesday on the 11th at 12:30 for an informational meeting. No testimony will be taken, but we will monitor it, and I'm certain it's going to be a barn burner. That is what happened in week 4 and what to expect for week 5. Look for our emailed update on Sunday with more information. And as always, thank you.